The conference room fell silent as Marcus Thompson, our CEO, leaned back in his leather chair and delivered the words that would change everything. "Sarah, you're brilliant with numbers, but you're too emotional to handle the investor presentation. We need someone who can keep their feelings in check." 24 hours later, that same emotional approach he criticized would land us the biggest funding round in our company's history, and expose a truth about leadership that would shake the foundation of everything I thought I knew about corporate success. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning of October 15th started like any other Tuesday at Meridian Analytics, our mid-sized data consulting firm nestled in the heart of Austin's tech district. Coffee machines hummed their familiar tune, keyboards clicked in rhythmic symphony, and the scent of fresh bagels from the corner deli wafted through our open-plan office. I arrived at 7:30 sharp, as always, clutching my oversized ceramic mug, the one with Data Queen emblazoned across it that my team had gifted me last Christmas. At 28, I had climbed the ranks faster than anyone expected when I first walked through Meridian's doors 4 years earlier. Fresh out of Stanford with my MBA in hand, I possessed what my colleagues called an unusual combination: analytical precision mixed with genuine empathy for our clients' struggles. While others saw spreadsheets and profit margins, I saw stories, real people grappling with business challenges that kept them awake at 3 in the morning. My corner desk overlooked the bustling streets below, where food trucks lined up to serve the lunch rush to dozens of startups that had sprouted throughout the neighborhood. The view reminded me daily that we weren't just crunching numbers in isolation. We were part of a vibrant ecosystem where innovation thrived on human connection and authentic relationships. The ping of Slack notifications pulled me from my morning routine. Marcus had scheduled an emergency leadership meeting for 9 o'clock. The subject line read simply, "Hartwell Industries, final decision." My stomach tightened. Hartwell represented the opportunity we'd been chasing for 8 months, a potential $2 million contract that could catapult Meridian into the big leagues and secure our expansion plans for the next 3 years. Hartwell Industries manufactured sustainable packaging solutions for major retailers across the Southwest. Their CEO, Patricia Hartwell, had built the company from her garage 20 years ago and now commanded respect throughout the industry. More importantly, she was known for her commitment to working with partners who shared her values of environmental responsibility and genuine customer care. The conference room buzzed with nervous energy when I arrived. Marcus sat at the head of our polished mahogany table, flanked by our senior partners, David Chen from Operations, Lisa Rodriguez from Business Development, and James Mitchell from Finance. Each wore expressions that suggested the weight of this meeting extended far beyond our usual strategic discussions. "Sarah, glad you could join us," Marcus began, his tone carrying that particular edge I'd learned to recognize over the years. "We've received word that Hartwell Industries wants to move forward with final presentations next week. They're considering 3 firms, and we're fortunate to be in the running." Lisa leaned forward, shuffling through her notes. "Patricia Hartwell will be flying in from Denver with her entire executive team. This isn't just about presenting our proposal anymore, they want to see who we really are as a company." She specifically requested that whoever presents demonstrates not just technical competence, but authentic leadership that aligns with her company culture. My pulse quickened. For months, I had been the primary point of contact with Hartwell's team. Every late-night call, every detailed analysis, every creative solution flowed through my desk. I knew their pain points better than anyone: the sustainability metrics they struggled to track, the supply chain inefficiencies that frustrated their operations team, the customer satisfaction scores that kept Patricia awake at night. More than that, I understood Patricia herself. During our video calls, I'd noticed the family photos behind her desk, the way her voice softened when discussing her company's environmental impact, the genuine pride she took in employees who had grown with the company for decades. She wasn't just a CEO making business decisions, she was a leader who viewed her company as an extension of her personal values and legacy. "Obviously, this presentation will make or break our year," Marcus continued, his fingers drumming against the table surface. "Which is why I've decided that David will handle the main presentation. His experience with large-scale implementations gives us the gravitas we need for this level of client." The words hit like cold water. David was competent, certainly, but he had joined our Hartwell meetings only recently and approached the relationship with the detached professionalism that worked well for our traditional corporate clients. He saw Hartwell as another contract to be won through technical superiority and competitive pricing. "Marcus, with respect, I think there might be a misunderstanding," I said, careful to keep my voice steady despite the confusion swirling through my mind. "I've been building this relationship for 8 months. Patricia and her team specifically requested that their primary contact lead the presentation. They want continuity and authentic connection. Marcus exchanged glances with James, who adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses before speaking. Sarah, your relationship building has been valuable during the development phase. But this is the closing phase. We need someone who can maintain professional distance and focus purely on business metrics without getting caught up in emotional connections. The phrase, emotional connections, landed with a particular sting. Throughout my career, I'd heard variations of this criticism, always delivered by well-meaning colleagues who viewed emotional intelligence as a liability rather than an asset. In their world, successful business meant maintaining clear boundaries between personal feelings and professional decisions. I understand the importance of this presentation, I replied, choosing my words carefully. But I believe our strength with Hartwell comes precisely from understanding their values and connecting with their mission. Patricia has mentioned multiple times that she chooses partners based on cultural alignment, not just technical capabilities. Lisa nodded slowly. Sarah makes a valid point. Hartwell has turned down technically superior proposals in the past because they didn't feel the partnership would be authentic. Patricia specifically mentioned during our last call that she wants to work with people who get it on a deeper level. Marcus's expression hardened. That's exactly what concerns me. Sarah, you're brilliant with analysis and client relations, but you get too invested in these relationships. You take client feedback personally. You spend time on calls discussing their challenges beyond our scope of work. Last month, you stayed late to research sustainability certifications that weren't even part of our proposal. Those sustainability certifications ended up being crucial to their decision-making process, I countered, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. When Patricia mentioned them during our strategy session, I could provide immediate insight because I'd already researched their importance to her industry. That kind of preparation comes from genuine investment in understanding their business. David cleared his throat uncomfortably. Look, Sarah, nobody questions your dedication. But Marcus has a point about maintaining professional boundaries. These high-stakes presentations require a certain detachment. We can't let personal feelings cloud our judgment about what the client needs to hear. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was David, who had sat through exactly 3 client meetings with Hartwell, explaining what the client needed to hear. Meanwhile, I had spent countless hours not just analyzing their technical requirements, but understanding the human dynamics that drove their decision-making process. Patricia Hartwell didn't just want a vendor. She wanted a partner who understood that behind every data point lived real people whose livelihoods depended on making smart business decisions. When she discussed supply chain optimization, she wasn't just talking about efficiency metrics, she was talking about reducing environmental impact and supporting suppliers who shared her values. Marcus, I respect your concerns about emotional investment, I said, leaning forward slightly. But what you're calling too emotional is actually deep client understanding. When Patricia talks about sustainability metrics, I don't just hear data requirements. I understand that she's trying to balance profitability with environmental responsibility because that's core to her identity as a leader. James shuffled his papers impatiently. Sarah, that's exactly what we're talking about. You're making this about personal connection when it should be about delivering results. Hartwell Industries is a business, not a charity. They need to see that we understand business fundamentals, not emotional nuances. The frustration building inside me threatened to spill over. How could I explain that understanding emotional nuances was a business fundamental? That Patricia's decision would be influenced not just by our technical proposal, but by her gut feeling about whether we truly understood her company's mission. Let me ask you something, I said, fighting to keep my voice level. Why do you think Hartwell has specifically requested that their primary contact lead the presentation? Why haven't they asked for our most senior partner or our technical director? It's because relationship and trust matter to them. Marcus stood up, signaling that the discussion was moving toward conclusion. Sarah, I appreciate your passion. And I recognize the relationship you've built. But this is a $2 million decision. We cannot afford to let emotional investment cloud our professional judgment. David has experience presenting to Fortune 500 companies. He understands how to speak their language. Hartwell Industries isn't a Fortune 500 company, I replied, my voice rising slightly despite my efforts at control. They're a family-built business that happens to have grown into a major player. Patricia Hartwell still remembers when she knew every employee by name. She makes decisions based on trust and alignment, not just technical specifications. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Sarah, maybe we could compromise. I could handle the main presentation, and you could join for the relationship aspects. The suggestion felt like a slap. After 8 months of building genuine connection with Patricia and her team, I would be relegated to a supporting role while someone else presented the work I had conceptualized and developed. That's not a compromise, I said, no longer attempting to hide my frustration. That's treating the relationship as an afterthought instead of recognizing it as our primary competitive advantage. Marcus walked to the window, gazing out at the street below. When he turned back, his expression had settled into the resolute look I recognized from difficult client conversations. Sarah, you're proving my point right now. You're taking this personally instead of thinking strategically about what's best for the company. This emotional reaction is exactly why you're not ready for this level of responsibility. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that couldn't be extinguished. My colleagues avoided eye contact, suddenly fascinated by their notepads and coffee cups. In that moment, I realized that everything I considered my greatest strength, the ability to forge genuine connections, to understand clients as human beings rather than just revenue sources, to invest emotionally in successful outcomes, was being reframed as a liability. Lisa finally broke the silence. What if we scheduled a practice session? Sarah could run through her approach with the team, and we could evaluate whether her style aligns with our presentation strategy. There's no time for practice sessions, Marcus replied curtly. The presentation is next Tuesday. David, I need you to review all the Hartwell materials and prepare a comprehensive technical presentation. Focus on ROI, implementation timelines, and competitive advantages. Keep it professional and fact-based. As the meeting disbanded, I remained seated while my colleagues filed out. The conference room suddenly felt enormous, its walls echoing with the weight of a decision that seemed to dismiss everything I had contributed to this opportunity. The afternoon passed in a blur of forced productivity. I attempted to focus on other client projects, but my mind kept returning to the Hartwell presentation. Every email exchange I'd had with Patricia, every insight I'd gathered about her company's culture, every moment of genuine connection we'd built, all of it would be filtered through David's more traditional approach. Around 4 o'clock. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia herself, looking forward to Tuesday's presentation. Excited to see how your team's approach aligns with our values. Your insights during our calls have been invaluable. I stared at the message, feeling the irony cut deep. Patricia valued exactly what Marcus had criticized: the emotional investment, the personal connection, the genuine care for her company's success beyond just our own profit margins. That evening, I found myself walking through the quiet streets of Austin's downtown district, processing the day's events. Food trucks were packing up, office lights were dimming, and the city was transitioning from business mode to evening relaxation. The contrast highlighted something I was beginning to understand about the corporate world: the assumption that business success required emotional detachment, that caring too much somehow diminished professional credibility. But as I replayed my conversations with Patricia over the past 8 months, I knew that assumption was fundamentally flawed. Her business had thrived precisely because she refused to separate her values from her decisions. She built supplier relationships based on mutual respect, hired employees who shared her environmental commitment, and chose business partners who understood that profit and purpose could coexist. The question that haunted me as I walked home was whether there was space in corporate America for leaders who led with their hearts as well as their heads, or whether emotional intelligence would always be viewed as a weakness rather than a superpower. The weekend arrived with the weight of unfinished business hanging over everything. While David immersed himself in technical specifications and PowerPoint templates, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to squander 8 months of relationship building for the sake of what Marcus considered professional presentation standards. Saturday morning found me at my favorite coffee shop in South Austin, laptop open to emails from Patricia's team. Rebecca Martinez, Hartwell's VP of Operations, had sent detailed questions about our sustainability tracking methodology, questions that revealed deep concerns about environmental impact measurement that went far beyond simple compliance metrics. As I crafted responses, my phone rang with an unknown Denver number. Sarah? This is Patricia Hartwell. I hope you don't mind me calling on a weekend, but I wanted to discuss a few things before Tuesday's presentation. My heart rate accelerated. Patricia rarely made direct calls outside business hours unless something significant was developing. Of course, Patricia. What's on your mind? Well, I've been thinking about our conversations over the past few months, particularly your insights about integrating stakeholder values into operational decisions. My board meeting is scheduled for Thursday, and frankly, I'm facing some resistance from members who prioritize short-term cost savings over long-term sustainability investments. I grabbed my notebook, immediately recognizing the deeper challenge Patricia was navigating. Her board included traditional investors focused purely on quarterly returns, while she was trying to build a company that balanced profitability with environmental responsibility. That sounds like a complex dynamic to manage, I replied carefully. How do you typically approach those conversations when values and immediate financial interests seem to conflict? Patricia sighed. That's exactly what I've been hoping to discuss with your team. I need partners who understand that sustainable business practices aren't just feel-good initiatives, they're strategic advantages that drive long-term value. But I also need help articulating that case to stakeholders who measure success differently. The conversation continued for 45 minutes, with Patricia sharing concerns about board pressure, supplier relationship challenges, and the delicate balance between growth and maintaining company culture. Every topic she raised connected to emotional intelligence, understanding human motivations, navigating competing interests, building consensus among diverse stakeholders. When we finished the call, I sat staring at my notes with a profound realization. The presentation David was preparing would focus entirely on technical implementation and cost-benefit analysis. While those elements mattered, they completely missed the human leadership challenges that actually kept Patricia awake at night. Monday morning brought an unexpected development. I arrived at the office to find Marcus in a heated discussion with Lisa Rodriguez near the reception area. Their conversation stopped abruptly when they noticed me approaching. Sarah, perfect timing, Lisa said, though her expression suggested otherwise. We just received some concerning news about the Hartwell presentation. Marcus crossed his arms, his jaw set in the stubborn line I'd learned to recognize during difficult client negotiations. Hartwell's assistant called this morning. Apparently, Patricia is bringing 2 additional board members to tomorrow's presentation, investors who weren't originally planning to attend. The implications hit immediately. Patricia was escalating the presentation from an operational review to a board-level strategic decision. This wasn't just about choosing a consulting partner anymore. It was about demonstrating to skeptical investors that emotional intelligence and sustainable business practices could coexist with profitable growth. Did they provide any context about why the board members are joining? I asked, though I suspected. I already knew the answer based on Saturday's phone conversation. Lisa consulted her notes. Patricia mentioned that some board members have expressed concerns about the company's direction and want to evaluate potential partners more thoroughly. She specifically requested that we address how our approach supports both operational efficiency and stakeholder alignment. David emerged from the elevator, overhearing the tail end of our conversation. Stakeholder alignment? I thought this was about data analytics and supply chain optimization. It was never just about data analytics, I said, unable to keep frustration from creeping into my voice. Patricia has been dealing with board pressure about company direction for months. She needs partners who understand the business case for sustainable practices, not just the technical implementation. Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to the controlled tone he used during tense client situations. Sarah, you're doing it again. You're making assumptions about client motivations instead of focusing on deliverable outcomes. We don't know what these board members want to hear. Actually, we do know, I replied, pulling out my phone to reference notes from Saturday's call. Patricia called me over the weekend specifically to discuss board dynamics and stakeholder management challenges. She's facing pressure from investors who question sustainability investments, and she needs help articulating the strategic value of values-driven business practices. David's expression shifted from confusion to concern. She called you directly? Why didn't that conversation go through official channels? The question revealed everything wrong with our approach. Patricia had called me because she trusted me to understand the human complexities behind her business challenges. She needed advice about navigating competing stakeholder interests, not just technical specifications about data processing. She called because she's dealing with leadership challenges that require emotional intelligence and strategic thinking, I explained. Her board includes traditional investors who measure success purely through financial metrics, while she's trying to build sustainable competitive advantages through stakeholder alignment. Marcus shook his head dismissively. Sarah, you're proving my point. You're getting drawn into client psychology instead of focusing on business solutions. These board members are investors, they want to see ROI calculations and implementation timelines, not emotional analysis. Those board members are human beings making decisions based on both rational analysis and gut instincts, I countered. Patricia specifically mentioned that they need to see partners who understand the strategic value of sustainable practices, not just the technical implementation. Lisa looked between Marcus and me with growing unease. As our business development director, she understood client relationship dynamics better than most of our technical team Maybe we should consider adjusting our presentation approach, she suggested carefully. If Patricia is bringing skeptical board members, we might need to address both technical capabilities and strategic alignment. David frowned. I've spent the entire weekend preparing a comprehensive technical presentation. Changing direction now would mean starting over completely. Not starting over, I said quickly. Building on what you've prepared by adding strategic context that addresses board concerns. Patricia needs partners who can help her articulate the business case for sustainable practices to skeptical investors. Marcus walked to the windows overlooking the parking lot, where early morning commuters were arriving for another week of Austin's tech industry hustle. When he turned back, his expression had hardened into the resolute determination I recognized from his most challenging business decisions. Here's what we're going to do, he announced. David will present the technical proposal as planned. Sarah, you'll join the meeting to handle any relationship questions that arise. But David leads the presentation and controls the messaging. The compromise felt hollow. Patricia had explicitly requested continuity with her primary contact, yet I would be relegated to answering supplementary questions while someone else presented work I had conceptualized and developed. Marcus, Patricia specifically asked for her primary contact to lead the presentation, I said, making one final attempt to shift his perspective. She values relationship continuity and authentic connection. Having David present while I sit on the sidelines sends exactly the wrong message about our approach to partnership. What it sends, Marcus replied firmly, is a message that we're professional enough to put our best presenters forward regardless of personal relationships. These are business people making business decisions. They want competence, not emotional connection. David cleared his throat uncomfortably. Look, I'm happy to collaborate however it makes sense. Maybe Sarah could introduce the relationship aspects, and I could handle the technical sections. The suggestion was well-intentioned but missed the fundamental issue. Patricia wasn't looking for separate relationship and technical presentations. She needed partners who integrated emotional intelligence with business strategy. As my colleagues dispersed to prepare for tomorrow's presentation, I remained in the lobby area processing the morning's conversation. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched Austin's business district come alive with entrepreneurs, consultants, and tech workers pursuing their Monday morning routines. The contrast struck me powerfully. Outside these walls, the most successful companies in Austin's thriving startup ecosystem were built by leaders who refused to separate emotional intelligence from business strategy. They understood that sustainable competitive advantages came from authentic stakeholder relationships, not just technical superiority. Yet inside Meridian Analytics, emotional intelligence was viewed as a liability rather than an asset. Caring about client success beyond our immediate profit margins was considered unprofessional. Understanding human motivations was dismissed as getting too involved rather than recognized as strategic insight. The afternoon brought a series of preparation meetings that felt increasingly disconnected from reality. David walked through his technical presentation while I provided background about Hartwell's culture and values. Marcus offered feedback focused entirely on polishing professional delivery rather than ensuring authentic connection with our audience. Around 3 o'clock, my phone buzzed with another message from Patricia, looking forward to tomorrow. The board members I'm bringing have some skepticism about consulting partnerships, but I'm confident your team's approach will demonstrate why authentic relationships matter in business. I stared at the message, feeling the weight of Patricia's confidence in our authentic relationship approach, the very approach Marcus had deemed too emotional for serious business presentations. That evening, I found myself working late in our empty office, reviewing 8 months of correspondence with Patricia's team. Every email exchange, every strategic insight, every moment of genuine connection painted a clear picture of what had made this relationship successful. Patricia valued consultants who understood that behind every business challenge lived real people dealing with complex pressures. When she discussed supply chain optimization, she wasn't just concerned about efficiency metrics, she worried about maintaining relationships with suppliers who shared her environmental values. When she talked about stakeholder alignment, she was grappling with the human challenge of building consensus among people with different priorities and perspectives. The technical proposal David had prepared was competent and thorough. It addressed every requirement in Hartwell's original request and demonstrated clear ROI through detailed financial modeling. But it completely missed the emotional intelligence that Patricia actually needed to navigate her leadership challenges. As I prepared to leave the office around 9 o'clock, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of accepting my relegation to a supporting role, I would prepare my own presentation approach, one that integrated technical competence with the emotional intelligence Patricia had consistently valued throughout our relationship. The presentation would address both the rational business case for our partnership and the human dynamics that actually drove decision-making in Patricia's organization. I would speak directly to the board members' concerns about sustainable business practices by demonstrating how emotional intelligence and stakeholder alignment created measurable competitive advantages. Walking through Austin's quiet downtown streets toward my apartment, I felt a clarity that had been missing since Friday's meeting. Tomorrow's presentation would be an opportunity to demonstrate that emotional intelligence wasn't a liability in business leadership. It was the secret weapon that turned good partnerships into transformational relationships. The question was whether I would have the courage to challenge Marcus's directive and present the approach I believed Patricia actually needed, or whether I would play it safe and accept the supporting role that kept me professionally protected but strategically marginalized. The answer would determine not just the outcome of tomorrow's presentation, but the trajectory of my entire career. Tuesday morning arrived with the crisp October air that makes Austin's weather perfect for high-stakes business meetings. I arrived at the office 40 minutes early, carrying a leather portfolio containing 2 presentations, David's technical approach that Marcus had approved, and my own integration of strategic thinking with relationship dynamics that I'd crafted until 2 in the morning. The Meridian conference room had been transformed for the occasion. Our usual scattered notebooks and coffee-stained coasters had been replaced with pristine materials, bottled water arranged at precise intervals, and a large monitor displaying our company logo. Marcus had even brought in fresh flowers, an unusual touch that revealed how much this contract meant to our firm's future. David was already seated, reviewing his slides one final time. His presentation followed a logical progression through technical specifications, implementation timelines, and ROI projections. Every chart was perfectly formatted, every data point meticulously verified. From a traditional consulting perspective, it was exactly what most clients expected to see. "Morning, Sarah," he said without looking up from his laptop. "I incorporated some of the relationship context you provided yesterday. There's a slide about understanding client culture and maintaining stakeholder communication." I reviewed his addition, a single bullet point about maintaining open communication with key stakeholders, buried among 20 slides of technical documentation. It was better than nothing, but it barely scratched the surface of the human dynamics that actually drove Patricia's decision-making process. Lisa arrived carrying fresh copies of our proposal, followed by Marcus, who immediately began adjusting the room set up with the focused intensity he brought to important client meetings. James wheeled in a projection cart and began testing audio levels with the methodical precision of someone determined to control every possible variable. "Sarah, you'll sit here," Marcus said, indicating a chair position slightly behind the main presentation area. "David will handle the primary presentation, and you can chime in if specific relationship questions arise." The seating arrangement spoke volumes about how Marcus viewed my role in this crucial meeting. Despite 8 months of relationship building, I was being positioned as a subject matter expert to be consulted rather than a strategic partner leading the conversation. At exactly 9:30, our receptionist announced that the Hartwell team had arrived. Through the conference room's glass walls, I watched Patricia enter our lobby accompanied by 3 people I recognized from previous video calls, plus 2 distinguished-looking individuals who must be the board members she'd mentioned. Patricia wore her trademark navy blazer with a subtle silver pin depicting a tree, a reminder of her company's environmental commitment that most people wouldn't notice but that revealed her attention to symbolic details. She moved with the confident stride of someone comfortable in business settings, yet her warm greeting of our receptionist reflected the personal touch that made her company culture so distinctive. Rebecca Martinez, Hartwell's VP of Operations, carried a thick folder that likely contained detailed questions about implementation logistics. Todd Williams, their CFO, looked exactly like someone prepared to scrutinize every financial projection with mathematical precision. The 2 board members maintained the formal bearing of experienced investors evaluating a significant partnership decision. Marcus stepped forward to welcome the group, his smile carrying the practiced warmth of someone skilled at initial client impressions. "Patricia, wonderful to see you again. Welcome to Meridian Analytics." "Thank you, Marcus," Patricia replied, scanning our team with the observant eye of a leader assessing group dynamics. "I'd like you to meet Jonathan Fletcher and Helen Zhao, 2 of our board members who wanted to participate in today's evaluation." Jonathan Fletcher appeared to be in his early 60s, with silver hair and the expensive suit of someone accustomed to corporate boardrooms. His handshake was firm but brief, his expression neutral in the way of investors withholding judgment until they've seen substantive evidence of competence. Helen Zhao radiated the sharp intelligence of someone who'd built her career making difficult financial decisions. Her questions during introductions were precise and focused, asking about our client retention rates, average project duration, and team experience levels with companies of Hartwell's size and complexity. As everyone settled around the conference table, I caught Patricia's eye and exchanged a subtle smile. After months of video calls and strategic conversations, seeing her in person felt like reconnecting with a colleague rather than meeting a client for the first time. Before we begin, Patricia said, addressing the room, I want to provide context about why Jonathan and Helen are joining us today. As we've discussed, Hartwell is at a strategic inflection point. We're experiencing rapid growth while trying to maintain our core values around sustainability and stakeholder responsibility. Jonathan leaned forward slightly. What Patricia is diplomatically explaining is that some of us have concerns about whether consulting partnerships align with practical business realities. We need partners who understand both operational efficiency and financial accountability. The tension in the room shifted perceptibly. This wasn't just about evaluating our technical capabilities, it was about demonstrating that values-driven business practices could coexist with investor expectations for profitable growth. Helen consulted her notes. We've reviewed your technical proposal, which appears comprehensive. But we're particularly interested in understanding how your approach addresses the human elements of organizational change. Sustainability initiatives often fail because of employee resistance or stakeholder misalignment. David stood up and moved to the presentation screen. Thank you for that context. I think you'll find that our technical approach addresses exactly those concerns through comprehensive change management protocols. For the next 25 minutes, David delivered a flawless presentation of our technical capabilities. His slides progressed logically through data integration methodologies, reporting dashboard designs, and implementation timelines. Every chart was clear, every projection was conservative, every risk factor was identified with corresponding mitigation strategies. Jonathan asked detailed questions about scalability and maintenance costs. Helen probed our experience with similar implementations and requested specific client references. Todd wanted clarification about integration with their existing financial systems. David handled every inquiry with competent professionalism, demonstrating solid grasp of technical requirements, but as the presentation continued, I watched Patricia's expression with growing concern. She was politely attentive, asking appropriate follow-up questions and nodding at relevant points. Yet the engagement I'd seen during our monthly strategy calls was missing. David was presenting to her rational mind while completely missing the emotional intelligence that actually drove her leadership decisions. When David concluded with a summary of implementation phases and projected outcomes, the room fell into the particular silence that follows technically competent presentations that somehow miss their mark. Thank you, David, Patricia said diplomatically. Your technical approach is certainly thorough. I wonder if we could hear from Sarah about the relationship aspects we've discussed. Marcus glanced at me with an expression that clearly conveyed his expectation of brief, supplementary comments that wouldn't disrupt David's professional presentation. I stood up, feeling the weight of 8 months of relationship building and the future of both our companies resting on the next few minutes. Thank you, Patricia. Before addressing relationship dynamics, I'd like to acknowledge the elephant in the room that David's presentation didn't directly address. Jonathan's eyebrows rose slightly at my deviation from expected consulting protocol. You're not just evaluating technical capabilities today, I continued, looking directly at the board members. You're trying to determine whether we understand that sustainable business practices require emotional intelligence, not just analytical competence. Helen leaned forward with sudden interest. Can you elaborate on that distinction? Absolutely. Your sustainability initiatives aren't failing because of technical implementation challenges. They're struggling because stakeholders don't understand how environmental responsibility creates measurable competitive advantages. You need partners who can help you articulate that business case to employees, suppliers, and investors who measure success differently. Marcus's jaw tightened visibly, but Patricia's expression brightened with recognition. Sarah's right, Patricia said. We can design perfect systems for tracking environmental impact, but if our suppliers don't understand why those metrics matter to our customers, the whole initiative becomes bureaucratic compliance rather than strategic advantage. I pulled out my portfolio and moved to the whiteboard, abandoning David's technical slides entirely. Let me show you what I mean. Jonathan, you mentioned concerns about practical business realities. What if I could demonstrate that emotional intelligence actually produces measurable financial outcomes? Jonathan crossed his arms skeptically. I'm listening. I began sketching a diagram that connected stakeholder relationships to financial performance metrics. When employees understand how their work contributes to environmental impact, productivity increases by an average of 12% according to recent workplace studies. When suppliers view sustainability requirements as partnership opportunities, Rather than compliance burdens, cost reduction averages 8% through collaborative innovation. Helen was taking notes now. You're suggesting that emotional engagement drives operational efficiency? I'm demonstrating that human motivation is the missing variable in most sustainability initiatives. You can't optimize what you don't measure, but you also can't implement what people don't understand or support. I turned to address Patricia directly. You mentioned last week that your board needs help articulating the strategic value of sustainable practices. The challenge isn't technical, it's communicational. You need partners who understand how to translate environmental impact into language that resonates with different stakeholder priorities. Rebecca jumped in. That's exactly our biggest challenge. Our operations team understands sustainability metrics, but our sales team struggles to explain why customers should care about environmental impact when making purchasing decisions. Because you're approaching it as a technical feature rather than an emotional benefit, I replied. Customers don't buy sustainability metrics, they buy the feeling that their purchasing decisions align with their personal values. Your sales team needs tools to connect environmental impact with customer identity and satisfaction. Todd frowned thoughtfully. How do you measure the ROI of emotional engagement? I moved to a fresh section of the whiteboard. Customer retention rates, employee satisfaction scores, supplier partnership longevity, brand loyalty metrics, premium pricing acceptance, all of these financial outcomes correlate directly with stakeholder emotional investment. For the next 15 minutes, I walked through specific examples of how emotional intelligence created measurable business value in similar organizations. I showed how understanding customer motivations enabled premium pricing, how engaging supplier emotions fostered collaborative innovation, how connecting employee work with purpose reduced turnover costs. Marcus sat frozen as I completely abandoned his carefully planned presentation structure. But Patricia and her team were fully engaged, asking detailed questions and building on the strategic framework I was developing in real time. This is fascinating, Helen said, but how do you actually implement emotional intelligence as a business strategy? You start by recognizing that every stakeholder group has different emotional drivers, I explained. Employees want to feel proud of their work's impact. Customers want to feel good about their purchasing decisions. Suppliers want to feel valued as partners rather than treated as vendors. Investors want to feel confident that values-driven practices create sustainable competitive advantages. Jonathan had been quiet for several minutes, but now he leaned forward with visible interest. You're describing stakeholder psychology as a strategic business discipline. Exactly. Most companies try to change behavior through policy and procedures. But sustainable change happens when you align organizational systems with human psychology. That's why emotional intelligence isn't a soft skill, it's the foundation of strategic implementation. Patricia was nodding enthusiastically. Sarah, this framework addresses exactly what we've been struggling with. We have the technical capabilities to track environmental impact, but we haven't had tools to help stakeholders understand why those metrics matter to their own success. The energy in the room had completely transformed. Instead of politely evaluating a technical presentation, Patricia's team was actively collaborating on strategic solutions to their most pressing business challenges. The whiteboard behind me was covered with interconnected diagrams showing how emotional intelligence translated into quantifiable business metrics. What had started as a deviation from David's approved presentation had evolved into a collaborative strategic planning session that none of us had anticipated. Helen Zhao pulled out her smartphone and snapped photos of the framework I'd developed. Sarah, I need to share this with our investment committee. The correlation between stakeholder emotional engagement and financial performance addresses concerns we've had about other portfolio companies. Jonathan Fletcher, who had entered the meeting with visible skepticism about consulting partnerships, was now leaning forward with the focused attention of someone recognizing unexpected value. Let me make sure I understand your thesis. You're arguing that emotional intelligence isn't just a nice-to-have leadership quality, it's a measurable competitive advantage that directly impacts bottom-line results. That's exactly right, I replied, moving to a fresh section of the whiteboard. But more importantly, it's a sustainable competitive advantage because it's difficult for competitors to replicate authentic stakeholder relationships. Patricia was practically glowing with excitement. This explains why some of our sustainability initiatives have succeeded while others have stalled despite identical technical implementations. The successful projects had champions who understood how to connect environmental impact with stakeholder motivations. Rebecca Martinez raised her hand slightly. Can we dive deeper into the supplier relationship example? We've been struggling with getting our packaging suppliers to embrace innovation rather than just meeting compliance requirements. I turned back to the whiteboard, creating a new diagram specifically focused on supplier psychology. Traditional Procurement approaches treat suppliers as vendors competing primarily on price and compliance. But when you understand supplier motivations, growth opportunities, technical challenges they enjoy solving, recognition for innovation, you can structure relationships that inspire collaborative problem solving. Todd Williams, who had been quietly taking notes throughout the discussion, looked up from his legal pad. What does that look like in practical terms? How do you transform a compliance-focused supplier relationship into an innovation partnership? You start by understanding what success means to your suppliers beyond just your contract, I explained. Maybe they're trying to break into new markets where environmental credentials matter. Maybe they have engineering teams excited about sustainability challenges but haven't found clients willing to invest in development time. Maybe they want case studies demonstrating their innovation capabilities to attract other forward-thinking customers. Helen was nodding vigorously. So instead of demanding compliance with predetermined specifications, you create collaboration opportunities where both companies benefit from innovative solutions. Exactly. And here's where the financial impact becomes measurable, I said, adding numbers to the supplier relationship diagram. Collaborative supplier relationships typically reduce costs by 8 to 15% through joint innovation, while compliance-only relationships often increase costs over time due to adversarial dynamics and lack of creative problem-solving. Patricia turned to address her board members directly. This is why I've been advocating for deeper consulting partnerships rather than just technical implementation services. We need advisors who understand human psychology as a business discipline. Marcus had remained silent throughout my extended presentation, his expression cycling through confusion, frustration, and grudging recognition that the room's energy had completely shifted from his carefully planned agenda. David sat frozen in his chair, uncertain whether to support my unscripted approach or attempt to redirect the conversation back to his technical presentation. Jonathan consulted his watch. We were now 40 minutes past the originally scheduled presentation time, yet nobody seemed interested in concluding the meeting. Sarah, you mentioned employee engagement as another area where emotional intelligence creates financial impact. Can you elaborate on those metrics? I moved to a third section of the whiteboard, energized by the collaborative problem-solving atmosphere that had replaced the formal presentation dynamic. Employee engagement is where the financial impact becomes most dramatic. Companies with highly engaged workforces see 23% higher profitability, 18% higher productivity, and 12% better customer metrics according to Gallup's research. Rebecca leaned forward. But how do you actually engage employees around sustainability initiatives? Most people see environmental policies as additional bureaucracy rather than meaningful work. You connect their daily activities to a larger purpose, I replied, sketching out an employee engagement framework. Instead of asking people to comply with recycling procedures, you show them how their choices contribute to measurable environmental impact that aligns with their personal values. Instead of mandating energy conservation, you create team challenges where departments compete to develop creative efficiency solutions. Helen was taking extensive notes now. You're describing purpose-driven engagement rather than policy-driven compliance. Right. And here's the crucial insight. Purpose-driven engagement requires emotional intelligence from leadership. You can't inspire people to care about environmental impact if you don't understand what motivates them personally. Todd raised his pen. What about measurement? How do you track the effectiveness of emotional engagement strategies? I turned back to the financial metrics section of my whiteboard diagram. Employee satisfaction surveys, retention rates, internal promotion percentages, innovation suggestion frequency, voluntary overtime during sustainability projects, cross-departmental collaboration metrics, all of these become leading indicators of emotional engagement that predict financial performance. Patricia was practically beaming. Sarah, this framework provides exactly what we've been missing. We have the technical capability to implement sustainability programs, but we haven't had systematic approaches for generating stakeholder buy-in. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Patricia's team diving deeper into specific implementation strategies. We discussed customer communication approaches that connected purchasing decisions with personal values, supplier partnership models that incentivized collaborative innovation, and employee engagement tactics that transformed environmental initiatives. From compliance requirements into sources of workplace pride, throughout this extended strategic planning session, Marcus remained visibly uncomfortable with how far we deviated from his approved presentation structure. Yet he couldn't interrupt what was clearly resonating powerfully with our potential clients. Finally, Helen glanced at her watch and announced that they needed to wrap up to make their afternoon flight back to Denver. This has been incredibly valuable. Patricia, I think we have what we need to make a decision. Jonathan stood up and extended his hand to me. Sarah, your presentation addressed concerns I didn't even know I had about consulting partnerships. The framework you've outlined provides exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need. Patricia gathered her materials with the satisfied expression of someone whose instincts had been validated. I'll be honest, when we scheduled this meeting, I was hoping for confirmation that our relationship approach was sound. What we received was a comprehensive framework for scaling that approach across our entire organization. As the Hartwell team prepared to leave, Patricia pulled me aside for a brief private conversation. Sarah, I want you to know that what happened there is exactly why I wanted you leading this presentation. Your ability to connect business strategy with human psychology is rare in the consulting world. Marcus approached with his professional smile firmly in place. Patricia, thank you for the extended discussion. We'll await your decision and look forward to the possibility of partnering with Hartwell Industries. Actually, Marcus, I can give you our decision now, Patricia replied, her voice carrying the confident tone of someone who'd found exactly what she was looking for. We'd like to move forward with Meridian Analytics as our consulting partner, with Sarah serving as the primary relationship manager and strategic advisor. The silence that followed her announcement was pregnant with implications that would reshape everything about my role at Meridian Analytics. David recovered first. That's wonderful news, Patricia. I look forward to supporting the technical implementation. Of course, Patricia replied diplomatically. Technical excellence will be crucial, but the strategic framework Sarah outlined will guide our overall approach. After the Hartwell team departed, our conference room felt charged with the electric aftermath of a presentation that had exceeded everyone's expectations, except Marcus's. That was unexpected, he said, his voice carefully controlled. Sarah, you completely abandoned our planned presentation structure. Lisa, who had observed the entire meeting in fascinated silence, finally spoke up. Marcus, I think we need to acknowledge that Sarah's approach generated exactly the response we were hoping for. Patricia's team was more engaged than I've ever seen clients during a technical presentation. David nodded reluctantly. I have to admit, the energy in the room completely changed when Sarah started discussing emotional intelligence as business strategy. They went from politely evaluating our proposal to actively collaborating on solutions. James, ever focused on financial implications, consulted his notes from the meeting. Patricia committed to a $2 million contract with potential for expansion based on results. From a business development perspective, Sarah's approach was incredibly effective. Marcus walked to the windows overlooking Austin's business district, where the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the city's entrepreneurial landscape. When he turned back to face our team, his expression revealed someone grappling with assumptions that had been fundamentally challenged. I need to understand what happened there, he said slowly. Sarah, you turned a technical presentation into a strategic consulting session. You made claims about emotional intelligence that I frankly didn't know had financial backing. I gathered my notes from the whiteboard, feeling both exhausted and exhilarated from the morning's intense collaboration. Marcus, everything I discussed about emotional intelligence and financial performance is backed by research from organizations like Gallup, Harvard Business Review, and McKinsey. But more importantly, it's what Patricia has been telling us for months about what she actually needs. But you presented information that wasn't in our proposal, Marcus continued. You made commitments about strategic advisory services that go beyond our typical scope of work. Lisa stepped forward. Actually, Marcus, if you review our conversations with Patricia over the past few months, strategic advisory work has been implicit in everything she's requested. She's been asking for partners who understand stakeholder psychology, not just data processing. The realization was beginning to dawn on Marcus that his emphasis on professional detachment had nearly cost us the opportunity to demonstrate our most valuable capabilities. Patricia specifically mentioned that she chose us because Sarah understands business strategy as human psychology, David added. The technical implementation was always secondary to the relationship and strategic thinking. Marcus sat down heavily in his chair, processing the implications of a morning that had challenged his fundamental assumptions about professional consulting relationships. So you're telling me, he said slowly, that what I considered Sarah's biggest liability, her emotional investment in client relationships, was actually our primary competitive advantage? The question hung in the air like a revelation that would reshape how Meridian Analytics approached every future client relationship. Not just our competitive advantage, I replied carefully. Our sustainable competitive advantage. Because authentic emotional intelligence can't be faked or easily replicated by competitors. The afternoon that followed would bring conversations That would fundamentally alter my career trajectory and transform how our entire firm understood the relationship between emotional intelligence and business success. The aftermath of our Hartwell presentation created ripple effects that nobody at Meridian Analytics could have anticipated. Within 48 hours, Patricia's executive assistant called to schedule our first strategic planning session for the following week. But the real surprise came Thursday morning when my phone rang with a San Francisco area code. Sarah Mitchell? This is Dr. Amanda Rodriguez from Stanford Graduate School of Business. Patricia Hartwell suggested I reach out to you about a research project we're conducting on emotional intelligence in professional services. The conversation that followed revealed something extraordinary. Stanford's business school had been tracking consulting firms that demonstrated superior client retention and growth rates, trying to identify common factors that traditional business education might be missing. Meridian Analytics had appeared on their radar specifically because of client feedback praising our human-centered strategic approach. Patricia described your presentation as a masterclass in connecting business psychology with financial outcomes, Dr. Rodriguez explained. We'd like to document your methodology as a case study for our executive education programs. The academic validation was flattering, but what happened next transformed everything. Dr. Rodriguez mentioned that several venture capital firms had approached Stanford seeking partners who could identify consulting companies with scalable competitive advantages beyond technical expertise. There's growing recognition in the investment community that emotional intelligence represents an undervalued asset in professional services, she continued. Firms that excel at stakeholder relationships are generating superior returns, but most investors don't know how to evaluate or develop that capability systematically. That conversation led to the most pivotal meeting of my career. 3 weeks later, I found myself in the Austin offices of Catalyst Growth Partners, a venture capital firm specializing in professional services companies. The managing partner, Victoria Chen, had built her reputation identifying firms with sustainable competitive advantages that larger competitors couldn't easily replicate. Sarah, we've been following Meridian Analytics since the Hartwell contract announcement, Victoria began, spreading financial reports across the conference table. But we're more interested in the methodology you've developed than the individual client's success. Her colleague, Dr. Michael Santos, had apparently spent considerable time researching emotional intelligence applications in business settings. Traditional consulting firms compete on technical expertise, industry experience, or cost efficiency. But those advantages can be replicated. Authentic stakeholder relationships represent something much more valuable, a systematic approach to generating trust and buy-in that drives superior client outcomes. The 3-hour meeting that followed challenged my assumptions about venture capital and professional services investment. Instead of focusing purely on financial projections and market size, Victoria and Michael wanted to understand the psychological principles underlying our client relationship success. Walk us through your decision-making process during the Hartwell presentation, Victoria requested. Specifically, what drove you to abandon the approved technical presentation in favor of the emotional intelligence framework? I found myself explaining not just what had happened, but why stakeholder psychology had seemed more relevant than technical specifications for Patricia's actual business challenges. As the conversation progressed, Victoria and Michael began connecting my approach to broader trends they were observing across their portfolio companies. We're seeing similar patterns in other professional services firms, Michael explained. Companies that understand client psychology consistently outperform those focused purely on deliverable execution. But most firms stumble because they can't systematize emotional intelligence without losing authenticity. That observation led to the most important question of our discussion: could the emotional intelligence methodology I developed be scaled across multiple firms while maintaining the personal investment that made it effective? Victoria leaned forward with the focused intensity I'd learned to recognize from successful business leaders. Sarah, we're not just considering an investment in Meridian Analytics. We're evaluating whether you'd be interested in building a consulting firm specifically designed around emotional intelligence as a core competitive strategy. The proposition was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. Victoria described their vision of a new kind of professional services company that would differentiate entirely through stakeholder psychology and authentic relationship building. Instead of competing on technical capabilities or industry experience, we would become the firm that clients chose when they needed partners who understood organizational change as human psychology. The market opportunity is substantial, Victoria continued, pulling out research reports from several industry analysts. Mid-market companies are increasingly frustrated with traditional consulting approaches that deliver technically sound recommendations without generating stakeholder buy-in necessary for successful implementation. Michael nodded enthusiastically. Your Hartwell success demonstrates systematic application of emotional intelligence that produces measurable business outcomes. But more importantly, it reveals an approach that could transform how professional services firms operate. The conversation extended through the afternoon and into early evening, covering everything from hiring strategies for emotionally intelligent consultants to pricing models that aligned our success with long-term client value creation rather than short-term billable hours. But the discussion that would ultimately determine my decision centered on a question Victoria posed near the end of our meeting. Sarah, do you believe emotional intelligence can be taught to professionals who haven't naturally developed those capabilities? The question forced me to examine assumptions I'd been carrying throughout my career. Was emotional intelligence an innate talent that some people possessed and others lacked? Or was it a systematic skill set that could be developed through proper training and practice? I think emotional intelligence combines natural empathy with learned techniques for understanding stakeholder motivations, I replied carefully. Some people have stronger intuitive foundations, but anyone can develop better skills for reading organizational dynamics and building authentic relationships. Victoria and Michael exchanged glances that suggested my answer had significant implications for their investment thesis. That perspective aligns with our research, Michael said. Companies that treat emotional intelligence as a trainable competency, rather than an innate talent, consistently achieve better results in developing high-performing teams. Our meeting concluded with Catalyst Growth Partners expressing serious interest in providing both growth capital and strategic support for what Victoria called the next evolution of professional consulting. But their proposal included something I hadn't expected: an opportunity to serve as CEO of the new firm rather than remaining in a senior consultant role. Sarah, we're not looking to invest in another traditional consulting company, Victoria explained as we wrapped up our discussion. We want to back the leader who can build systematic competitive advantage around emotional intelligence and stakeholder relationship excellence. The drive back to Meridian Analytics gave me time to process the magnitude of what Catalyst Growth Partners was proposing. Instead of continuing as a senior consultant at an existing firm, I could build a new kind of professional services company. From the ground up, designing every system and process around the emotional intelligence principles that had driven our Hartwell success. But the opportunity also meant leaving behind the colleagues and company culture where I'd developed my career. Marcus had evolved significantly in his understanding of emotional intelligence as business strategy, and our entire team was embracing human-centered approaches with genuine enthusiasm. The decision became clearer during a conversation with Patricia Hartwell the following week. She had called to discuss expanding our partnership into additional business units, but our conversation quickly turned to broader questions about leadership and career development. Sarah, I want to share something with you, Patricia said during our video call. Yesterday, I spoke at a conference for women CEOs about choosing business partners. I specifically discussed how your emotional intelligence approach addressed strategic challenges I didn't even know I had. She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. After my presentation, 6 different CEOs approached me asking for introductions to consultants who understood stakeholder psychology as business strategy. There's clearly demand for what you've developed, but there aren't many professionals who can deliver authentic emotional intelligence at the level you demonstrated. That conversation crystallized my decision. If multiple CEOs were actively seeking consultants with emotional intelligence capabilities, the market opportunity Victoria had described was real and immediate. 2 weeks later, I submitted my resignation to Marcus along with a comprehensive transition plan for our existing client relationships. To his credit, Marcus supported my decision while ensuring that Meridian Analytics could continue serving clients with the human-centered approaches we'd developed together. Sarah, this opportunity represents validation of everything you've argued about emotional intelligence in professional consulting, Marcus said during our final strategic planning meeting. I wish I had recognized the value of your approach earlier, but I'm grateful for what you've taught our entire team about authentic stakeholder relationships. The transition period allowed me to work closely with David and Lisa to document the emotional intelligence methodologies we developed, ensuring that Meridian Analytics could continue applying those principles across their client portfolio. More importantly, it provided time to begin recruiting the founding team for what would become Empathic Strategies, the consulting firm I would build with Catalyst Growth Partners support. The first hire was Dr. Jennifer Walsh, an organizational psychologist with 15 years of experience helping Fortune 500 companies navigate complex stakeholder dynamics. Jennifer brought academic rigor to emotional intelligence applications that complemented my practical experience with client relationship building. What excites me about this opportunity, Jennifer explained during our initial strategy session, is the chance to apply research-backed psychological principles to business challenges in systematic ways. Most consulting firms treat emotional intelligence as intuitive soft skills rather than evidence-based competencies. Our second key hire was Carlos Rivera, a former McKinsey consultant who had grown frustrated with traditional firms' emphasis on analytical frameworks that ignored human organizational realities. Carlos possessed the strategic thinking capabilities necessary for complex business analysis, combined with genuine curiosity about stakeholder psychology. I've watched technically perfect recommendations fail repeatedly because consulting teams didn't understand organizational change as human psychology, Carlos shared. The opportunity to build consulting methodology that integrates analytical rigor with emotional intelligence addresses the biggest gap I've observed in professional services. Building empathic strategies from the ground up allowed us to design every system around the principles I discovered during our Hartwell success. Instead of traditional billing structures based on time and materials, we developed value-based pricing tied to client outcome achievement. Instead of hierarchical team structures that separated senior strategists from client relationship management, we created collaborative approaches where emotional intelligence informed every aspect of our work. The market response exceeded even Victoria's optimistic projections. Within 6 months, we had secured contracts with 12 mid-market companies seeking what they described as consulting that understands the human side of business change. Each engagement validated our thesis that emotional intelligence represented a systematic competitive advantage in professional services, but the most gratifying validation came during a follow-up conversation with Patricia Hartwell 18 months after our original presentation. Hartwell Industries had achieved remarkable success implementing the stakeholder engagement strategies we'd developed together, including 15% cost reduction through collaborative supplier relationships and 23% improvement in employee satisfaction scores. Sarah, I want you to know that the framework you presented that day has become foundational to how we approach all business relationships, Patricia told me during our quarterly strategy review. Your emotional intelligence methodology didn't just solve our immediate consulting needs, it transformed how we think about leadership and organizational development. Today, Empathic Strategies has grown to 35 consultants serving clients across technology, healthcare, manufacturing, and financial services industries. We've developed systematic training programs for emotional intelligence application, created assessment tools for evaluating stakeholder relationship effectiveness, and built measurement frameworks that connect human engagement with financial performance. More importantly, we've demonstrated that emotional intelligence isn't a soft skill that undermines professional credibility, it's the foundation of sustainable competitive advantage in an increasingly relationship-driven business environment. The irony of my journey continues to inspire both personal reflection and professional motivation. What Marcus originally criticized as being too emotional to lead became the cornerstone of building a consulting firm that investors actively sought to support. The human touch that traditional corporate culture viewed as unprofessional weakness proved to be exactly what clients and investors valued most highly. When young professionals ask me about building successful consulting careers, I share the fundamental truth that our Hartwell presentation revealed: business success requires both analytical competence and emotional intelligence working in integrated harmony. The leaders who understand that truth aren't too emotional to lead, they're the only ones equipped to navigate the complex human dynamics that actually drive organizational change and sustainable competitive advantage. The story that began with criticism about emotional investment in client relationships ultimately became proof that authentic human connection represents the most powerful and sustainable competitive advantage in professional services. Sometimes what others see as your greatest weakness is actually your most valuable strength waiting to be properly understood and systematically applied. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.